Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here is your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 4 of the People in Fundraising podcast series. It is Friday, January 17th, 2025, and today I am really excited and so grateful to welcome our guest, Sarah Hall, to our program. Sarah, good afternoon, and hope we have a wonderful conversation today.
Thanks, Tim. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this process. Intro for all the audience who don't know me, which is probably most of them. So Tim and I started working together at HBS in 2000, and I have, since 2019, been in the central AA&D office at Harvard, working on issues around data governance, data integrity, and data acquisition. We'll talk more about what that means later, but I've known Tim for a very long time, and it's great to see him as always.
Oh, thank you very much. It's great to see you as well, Sarah. And you're right, we started working together in September, I believe, of 2000. I don't know, maybe you joined first and then I joined with Val Roberts.
You were there already.
I was there already. Okay. And then in April or spring of 2003, Sarah became the director of prospect research at HBS. And that was a great opportunity for her. Then led the team for almost 12 years. And so you are by far my longest tenured manager. And I just am very grateful to welcome you on the podcast and so appreciative of the longevity that we had working together.
Likewise, it was a real boon, actually, to be at HBS, period, but also because that was kind of my toehold into Harvard, but also to be given the opportunity to manage the team when I did, or when I was. It was, I think, a little bit of a risk on the part of the leadership team there to put me in that role, and hopefully they feel like it paid off. The fact that I lasted as long as I did in that role certainly suggests that they weren't freaking out about their choice. But it was a really wonderful experience and a great place to kind of develop my management chops, such as they are.
Uh-huh. Well, yeah, and I remember watching you, not in one particular experience, but just over time, kind of at the forefront of the data and prospect management and portfolios. Like, I think a different person might have been like, we've always done prospect research, and we have, for all those years, like event bios and trip briefings, and you're cycling through the same prospects over and over again, which was needed. But I think you had the foresight to see how the industry was evolving and broadening, and to have the appetite to take on more of the portfolio piece, the proposals, and the data stuff that you're going to talk about now to help get you to where you are today. So just exciting to see that team expand.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in prospect research as a field started to identify in the early to mid 2000s that there were opportunities that we as researchers, excuse me, had because we were looking at individuals in so much detail so frequently, and we might have more information just through work that we did. So we did screening work around reunion classes at HBS, right? And that was a lot of time and energy spent looking at a specific cohort of people. And you would learn a lot about that large group and kind of identify as you're looking at these groups of people, oh, this person, like in the back of my mind, I want to remember this person for later because they seem like they're on a pathway to become a potentially great prospect later. And so maybe now is the time for us to start thinking about engaging with them. But we were doing it all in very discrete ways and not thinking very comprehensively. And others in the field, as I mentioned, we're starting to think about what can we as a group be doing that's more comprehensive, more formulaic, more systematic to help our colleagues identify the potential within our databases. And so I really feel like others who really pioneered this work helped me understand where the benefits of it were, and being able to participate in conversations with colleagues outside of HBS, inside of HBS too, but people doing this work already enabled me to kind of bring things back to the leadership team, and I think benefited from having open-minded leadership at the time too, to be able to say, I think that we're leaving money on the table and I'd like to be able to explore this and see if we can stand up something at HBS that would help us minimize the amount of money we leave on the table every year. Now, I don't know how successful it was, but I do feel like there's stuff that remains in place that I like to think of as my legacy there, and potentially other places, small scale legacy. But the fact that we were able to start that work and move the needle a little bit is really, it's nice to be able to think back about that. And on the data piece, we still use the same database today that we transitioned over to in 2005, which I'm sure you remember, not necessarily fondly. And I think I really benefited from, and I've said this to people over time, I've probably said it to you before, Tim, that I benefited from kind of raising my hand in the middle of that project and saying, I'm really interested in what's going on here. And I want to understand what's involved in moving us from a legacy system to a new one, and all of the moving parts and all of the work that goes into that. And so I was fortunate enough to work on a team at HBS that was helping us with our local implementation of the new system. But also, do you remember I was like not doing research for like 6 months? There was a stretch where,
yeah, I do remember that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was completely taken out of research for a little while to focus on some report development that needed to happen and to help move some of those projects forward. And then I came back. But what an opportunity to be able to do that. And it only reinforced my interest in the data that we all rely on. And so cut to 2019, 2018, and the university alumni affairs and development team taking an interest in questions around data governance. I was really lucky to be part of a working group in AA&D that was working on that. And then when this position became a thing, I was just like, that's what I want to do. And, I'm late in my career. It's not often that somebody who's been doing something like research and prospect management for so long has an opportunity like that to pivot into something related but different.
Sure.
And I feel really fortunate that people have taken, my experience and seen the benefits. Hopefully they feel like I'm making inroads in this work. I'm the only person who's done this work as a kind of focused effort within AA&D. I have many people, obviously, who work with me in this effort, but the role was created and I'm the first person to have it. So it's kind of wild to think about that. And I'm coming up on 5.5 years. So that's also kind of wild. I'm like, what have I done? I don't know if I've done anything.
No, you're too hard on yourself. I mean, 5 years in that particular role, and I'd love to hear more about, and you mentioned the specifics of the director of data governance. But yeah, I think don't sell yourself short here. You're
Well, you're very kind.
So I love you, Sarah. We're gonna pivot a little bit because like we're talking right now about the data governance. Let's continue on that thread, and then after we hear you talk about your role and projects that you can, kind of in general talk about, I'd love to hear how you entered the profession, and then we'll go later on into the questionnaire. I think you're in a good groove here talking about your current role.
All right. So the data governance role is one so Harvard is complex and decentralized. Within Alumni Affairs and Development, we try to be as centralized as possible, but there is a lot of independence that exists for the schools to operate in ways that work best for them. So Having said that, though, we do have this central team that is the AA&D Resources Group. And so there's a lot of work that happens in Alumni Affairs and Development Resources that supports Alumni Affairs and Development work across the university. So there's a lot of operational, technical, so the people who really make sure that our database, our donor and alumni database is functional on a daily, hourly basis, those people are all in a central team. They have colleagues at the schools who also focus on that, but not as in-depth, I would say, as we do centrally. And so my role is in that Alumni Affairs and Development Resources Group in a smaller group called Advancement Solutions. And we're really focused on making sure that the people who are doing the work of A&D across Harvard have the resources that they need to be successful. And so from a data governance perspective, the things that we've focused on in the first kind of 5 years or so have been questions around data disclosure policy. So previously, if people internal or external to Harvard had requests about our data, those requests could end up any number of places. So it might land on your desk, it might land on my desk, it might land on someone else's desk. And depending on the question, they might feel like they have the information to help out on their own. They might feel like they need to ask for help. So the outcome could be different depending on how it was handled.
Sure.
And so we also might end up sharing information that maybe we shouldn't share. And that's not to say that we were putting information at risk, but it just meant that, if we're being entrusted with this information, maybe we should think very carefully about the cases in which it would be provided to somebody who's not part of the AA&D community.
Yeah.
So we spent time coming up with some guidance around that in order to have things be more transparent and more consistent. And so that if you no matter who you ask, it should get routed to a central person or group to talk it through, and the outcome should be the same every single time.
Right. Yeah.
So that's been a big one.
Yeah.
And then we've also, a lot of things end up kind of taking the shape of policy, whether it's reviewing an existing policy to bring it up to speed with where we are today. So just recently we revised our privacy statement to make it more comprehensive and bring it up to date, our old policy or privacy statement data to 2014. So it was time to revise that and have it reflect, the work that we do now, which is very different, even in 10 years than it had been. So that was good. Spending some time thinking about making sure people have a clear understanding of how FERPA, the Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act, affects their work in A&D, because we do have access to student data. And so there are students who have requested that their information be protected. So we have to make sure that we're adhering to that law. But what does it mean when you work in A&D if you see that somebody has a FERPA protection in place? So those are things that we want to make crystal clear to people because of the implications and the risk if we take a misstep. And it could be accidental, that's fine, but we still want to treat those people as carefully as the law tells us we need to. So things like that. Those are kind of the big, I have other stuff I could go on, but I don't want to spend all of our time talking about that. The other part of my role is that I have a team, small but mighty team, that's focused on biodata integrity and biodata quality for A&D writ large. And we do things as mundane as double checking a person's status in terms of their degree information and making sure that they all their data around their degrees is accurate, to taking ownership of the process to graduate all the students every year. So in June, we have a huge file of students who convert over from students to alumni, and we undertake that process. And there's a lot of detailed work that goes into making sure that stuff's right. So that's when you do not want to get wrong.
That's right. So I'm imagining no vacation around June, right? There's no time off.
Right. Fortunately, we do have some good cross training, and there's always opportunities to do more of that. With a small team, you do end up having opportunities or the potential for single points of failure. And so that is something that I work hard to avoid. And we've been talking we're in our mid-year review process. And so I'm talking a little bit more with my colleagues about where are the opportunities for us to do more of that cross training so that
Yeah.
if a person needs to be out of the office in June, it's not going to create problems because the
Right.
graduations still need to happen. But if you're sick, even if it's not vacation, there's unplanned time off that needs to happen sometimes. And
Yeah.
you don't have control over so much that happens in life. And so we want to be able to accommodate. I mean, you have to. We don't want people working when they're sick
Right.
or other life events happen. So,
Sure. I'm just
yeah.
curious as a follow-up. You mentioned you've been in this role almost 5 years. And we both know from working in fundraising that, there are associations. There's the Plan Giving Group of New England, there's the New England
Yeah.
Development Research Association. Is there an association organization similar to, any of those entities that is specifically about data governance in higher education nonprofit that, as you're growing in this role that you can advise, mentor, learn from people?
Mhm. So I think at this point, a lot of the data governance organizations that exist kind of purely around data governance are a little bit more in like industry and in not in the nonprofit or collegiate world. And so that doesn't mean that they're not helpful. It's just that you may end up finding that some of the content that they deliver is a little bit more about business.
Yeah.
And while we are in a business, it's a very different type of business. And
Yeah.
so there is value. And I do follow, there's a group called DGIA. Now going to sound like I haven't done my homework, but there are data governance groups that I follow. What's also been very helpful is things that are a little bit more aligned with what we do. So EDUCAUSE is a really great resource in Harvard. One of the benefits of being at an organization like Harvard is that we have access to EDUCAUSE resources because we are staff here. So membership is kind of automatic. If you set it up, you're all set. And they have these kind of groups built around different aspects of work that happens within nonprofits. So it's very operational in the areas that I focus on certainly are more operational. So data privacy, data governance, and there are these people who are in these areas of practice who are participating through the website in a kind of virtual community together. And earlier this year, I went to the AASP conference, or actually not earlier this year, it's 2025 now. In November, I went
Okay.
to the AASP conference in New Orleans, which had some really great, not necessarily specific to data governance, but there's so much that touches on data governance from an operations perspective. I mean, fundamentally, I'm a big believer that what my role is we're doing data governance. We've been doing data governance. We just didn't label it as such.
Sure.
There's a lot that happens in an organization that is data governance. What we're trying to do is put a little bit more formalization around that. And so that's kind of the role that I play is how can I help create a little bit more structure around what people may not realize is data governance and help them understand what it means in their day to day.
Yeah. Interesting. Man, that is, yeah, so interesting to hear about that. I mean, because when I prepared the questions, I'm like, I don't know what data governance really
Right.
is.
Sometimes I don't either.
Um, so thank you for, going into that
Yeah,
in some
sure.
detail, Sarah. I'd love for you to share, just for a few minutes, please, how you actually entered the nonprofit world leading up to
Sure.
joining HBS in late 2000.
So I'm going to age myself. I graduated from college in 1994 and I moved to Boston that fall. And so this is like at the birth of the internet. So when I was looking for jobs, I was still doing that old school thing where I was like writing up a letter and attaching a copy of my resume and sending it out to like different. And I'd been a history major in college and was thinking maybe I'll work in an archive or try to find a job that's a little bit more like aligned with my experiences digging through old papers. And so I sent my resume to multiple different nonprofits in Greater Boston and ultimately was fortunate to land a position at the Museum of Science, which is a tremendous institution in Boston. and was working in their fundraising and membership office. So I worked closely with some people who had much more experience in fundraising and engagement, donor engagement. And I was like the administrative support person for the boards of trustees and the board of trustees and the board of overseers there. So I took minutes during the meetings, which was fascinating. Like I got to meet people who served on the board of trustees at the Museum of Science were not slouches,
Yeah.
and I'm like 23 years old and I'm like, hey, what's up? So, but I got to meet some really wonderful and, generous people who give not only their resources, but their time
Yeah.
to institutions in Boston. And it was a really wonderful introduction to just philanthropy. But a woman I worked with there, who my partner, who works at MIT, also worked with at one point, Sarah Fernandez,
Mm.
she was the researcher in that office, and her cubicle was just nothing but books. And I was smitten with this situation. And so I was just like, every chance I got, I was picking her brain. Plus, she's just a lovely, lovely human being.
Mm.
But I picked her brain constantly, and I was just like, okay, well, that's what I want to do. If I'm going to stay in development, I want to be doing research because it scratches so many itches, It's just like,
Uh,
oh, I want to be able to look up information and understand people, but I also want to know like what are people into and what makes them tick.
yeah.
And it kind of research enables you to learn a lot about a person or a group of people. Um, and it's permission to kind of figure out what are their interests and how do those interests align with your organization and its mission,
Totally.
and how can you bring those things together, and how can you help your colleagues who need to talk to them understand where the opportunities are
Yeah.
to bring all of that together and hopefully benefit the institution overall. It's really wild. So anyway,
Yeah.
so I worked with Sarah there. I got a job at, then I went to WBUR where I was doing more kind of administrative stuff in support of their annual giving program and membership drives. But I did do research on people from time to time there. And then I was hired by our mutual former colleague, Val Roberts, to do research at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, and worked with her there. And she really taught me all of the foundational information I needed in order to be successful as a researcher. She was a really wonderful teacher.
Yeah.
And I then, my position there was eliminated. I was laid off. I worked at Mass General Hospital for about 6 months, and then Val was at HBS. And
Yeah.
she said, I have this position coming open. You should look at it. I applied. She hired me, and the rest is history.
I knew some of that, but I didn't know, some of the other details about that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
Yeah. Val Roberts is now in Panama in retirement.
for her. Why
Yeah.
does that not surprise me at all? Well done, Val.
And, light a candle, call out to the universe. I'm trying to get her to be a guest on this podcast as well.
I'll send some positive energy out into the world on your behalf, Tim.
Thank you. I think she's just really loving retirement, and she's like, why would, that was that stage of my life, and now I'm living this awesome stage too, and I respect that. So
Yes. And, she's a person who really leans in on life. So I can imagine she is enjoying herself immensely. I hope she's having a fantastic time.
yes, absolutely. Sarah, you mentioned graduating from college. Let's go there to the next question. So you're an alum, very proud and active alum
Yes.
for Kenyon College. And
Yes.
I remember, like, your little window in your office at HBS had Kenyon stickers, and hearing you talk about Kenyon as a reunion volunteer and other efforts with your class.
Mhm.
I'd just love to know for a few minutes, what about that experience really stuck with you and made you want to give back in the various ways you do to Kenyon, please.
I mean, it really boils down to community for me. I think my class was a pretty tight-knit group, even though we had a lot of different kind of subgroups as classes do.
Yeah.
It's like that line out of Ferris Bueller, the motorheads, the jocks. So
That's,
I don't know if we had any motorheads, but maybe my friend down in Austin could count. But I have friendships today that
yeah.
are still incredibly close and really meaningful and kind of like, they're my family outside of my family
Yeah.
relationships. They're the family I choose. And I met them all at Kenyon, or I met them because of people I met at Kenyon. And um, my non-blood family is almost to a person can be tied back to some sort of Kenyan relationship. My partner in life is somebody that I know because he and I both had mutual friends from my class. He did not go to Kenyon, but he's gone
Wow.
to our reunions. Poor guy. People are like, well, where did you live? And he's like, I did not go here. And they're like, I thought I had you in poli sci. And he's like, no, no, I did not. So it was just, it was a, I just loved it there. I think it was some of the best time of my life, and I feel very fortunate to have experienced that place because it really is very special. And it's my privilege really to be able to give time back to a place that means so much to me. So, I'm not in a place where I can throw a lot of money at them. I do what I can because that's important to me. But what I can't give in resources, I give in my time. I'm on a little bit of a break now, but I'm starting to think about dipping my toes back in the water to
Oh,
take
cool.
on some new responsibilities if they'll have me. So
Awesome.
we'll see what happens.
Yeah,
But it was a great place to be.
that's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, as I was thinking about this question in particular, that you and Josh Merrow and Skip Nordoff, we all worked together at HBS. You all went to college in Ohio at different institutions.
Yeah,
Um,
they went to our nemesis.
that's right.
Kenyon and Denison are big. There's a lot of rivalry there.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Go on.
No, that's okay. But I would say, you three come to mind in terms of the people I've worked with who are very passionate about their undergraduate alma mater and, give back in various ways. Um, and then, are working day to day in an industry that is designed to give back and support community. So very cool.
Yeah, I think that's just like dumb luck more than anything else. But yeah, there's something about a small liberal arts college that if you're wired for it, it takes root in your soul,
Yeah.
and it doesn't let you go, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So I just thank goodness, like my parents were both graduates of liberal arts experiences, and they encouraged me to explore that for myself. And it was one of those situations where your parents might know you a little bit better than you think when you're 17 years old.
Yes.
And they were right to push me away from really far away and really big.
Uh-huh. That's good.
Think twice, hon.
Yeah.
Think twice. It worked out
Um,
wonderfully.
it has, absolutely. I want to go to this next question here, and I've been trying. I think I've asked it only maybe one other time in the 100 and other 25 plus interviews I've done. I just love this quote, and I feel like it can apply very much to fundraising work where, lots of institutions are bootstrapping resources and
Mhm.
staff and whatnot. Um, and I just, with your perspective, your longevity at Harvard, a place where people from the outside can think, oh, they've got all the money in the world. They can buy any vendor they want. And then, if it doesn't work, then
Right.
it's just a sunk cost. So I'd love to get your perspective on this quote and how it applies to your experience. The quote is from Henry Ford, who once observed, quote, "If you need a machine and don't buy it, you will ultimately find that you have paid for it and don't have it." And if we have time, I'll share why that quote resonates with my career. But I want to hear
Mhm.
from you, from your perspective. Have you had projects or as a manager where it's like, I just need this would be so valuable for what we're doing. And you maybe have had to advocate more than other resources, whether that's a vendor or staff or training. Anything come to
Mhm.
mind?
I think the thing that comes to mind mostly is around the human resource question, right? And
Mm.
so at Harvard, I think we have a luxury of riches. There's no doubt about that. But if anybody spends time understanding how budgets and endowments work, they understand that even with the huge endowment that we have, we don't have unlimited resources. And on a year over year basis, there's fluctuation, and we are affected by the same economic things that affect other institutions as well. Just the scale is different, right? But we have a large organization, and there's a lot that we are being asked to do as technology. I think this is one of the things where technology can be both a blessing and a curse,
Sure.
because as new technologies emerge, there's a lot of interest in how can they impact us positively and help us in the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
But investing time in understanding how to really maximize and leverage those to their best potential takes time that we don't necessarily have, because we have a lot of day to day and other responsibilities to manage. So the thing that I think about the most is, and that I have, as a manager of many years, it's always identifying those areas of work where you feel like something is either not being done as effectively or as efficiently as it could be done because we don't have the human resources to apply to it, or it's just not getting done at all. And
Yeah.
so how do you make an effective case to to illustrate the need that you have? And I feel like I've done that over time, and sometimes I've been successful and sometimes I haven't.
Mm.
And in the cases where you aren't successful, it's, you know, especially at a place like Harvard, school over school, unit over unit, there is so much competition for a limited amount of resource. And so you make your best case. And if it doesn't work out, then you take a step back and you say, okay, well, this is what it means. And this is what we're going to do as a result. And in many cases, just, okay, well, we're just going to be in a status quo kind of situation because we don't have an
Right.
opportunity to make the adjustments because we don't have the resources that would have helped us do that. So this is how it's going to be. And,
Yeah.
you know, talk to us if there's something that is problematic about that, and we'll set something else aside to prioritize this other thing. But
Right.
it puts you in a position to have to calibrate a little bit, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But it can be a struggle.
Yeah. I like that use of the phrase calibrate. It definitely is like, if we can't do this and you need me to deliver this, then other things need to be adjusted, calibrate what we can do.
Right. And, there's certain things that are non-negotiable, certainly in my team and with our responsibilities. We can't not graduate people. But, if there are other things that are being identified, and this happens a lot, this has been true in my whole experience. Okay, well, if you're telling me that this is now a priority, then this other thing that I identified at the beginning of the year as a goal for myself is going to be set aside. And then is that what we want to do? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And let's go onward.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's a balance.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a great observation.
Yeah. We have about 5 minutes left, Sarah, and so for this last question, there's a little bit of a runway to get to it. You work in Cambridge, and I found this quote in a New York Times article from the awesome actor John Malkovich, who lives in Cambridge. And I wanted to see how I can apply it to this podcast. He was interviewed by the New York Times, and one of the things he said was, quote, "I'm wary of all the things that people believe that make them think this is me," end quote. Um, so as your life has progressed and as you are approaching, 25 years at Harvard, and you've gone from prospect research to management to data governance now, what aspects of yourself have changed over that time so that you're no longer the me that you were at other points in your
Mhm.
career, your life?
Mhm.
Anything come to mind?
Um, I think that the biggest one I would think of, the thing that this immediately made me think of was how, and you probably experienced this with me early in my career at HBS, I would get wound up about stuff,
Hmm.
small stuff, much more frequently than I do now.
Oh, okay.
So, it was like a lot of it had to do with timing of things that we might be asked to do. So it was just like, oh, did you just forget to ask us to help with that? Or did you, like what were the circumstances that led to this feeling like we have limited time to do what's being asked of us?
Yeah.
And sometimes there were very good reasons for it, but sometimes there were not. And in the cases where it was evident that there were not, I would be vocally frustrated and probably a little like my hair is on fire. And I might have walked into your office more than once and been like, this is not very professional as your manager, but what the bleep is happening here?
Right.
Now, that's, you're going to feel how you're going to feel. But at 28 or 32, I was probably much more inclined to have that kind of strong visceral response, immediate anger or frustration. And now I'm just like, okay, so and so like and I feel like that's a continuation without getting too much into like the ridiculousness of myself. But like as a child, I was a very tightly wound kid and I was prone to temper tantrums and rages. And my parents would chuckle at me and that just made me more. So
Uh,
and so that kind of propensity to be that way has diminished over time and it just continues to go in this downward trajectory, which is good for everybody, including myself. But it's just like as you age, I think you learn what's really important and really what's worth. If you're going to develop a negative energy around something, think about whether it's worth it.
yeah.
So, like, there's a lot of negative energy that you can create, that you can allow into your space, that is around us. No matter where you are in the world, there is stuff that will create negative energy around you or threaten to invade your space with its negativity.
Yeah.
You can decide whether or not you let that in.
Yeah.
And so that's all that sounds really like. Next, I'm gonna like light some sage and like, I don't know, but we're not quite there yet. I'm not quite that earthy crunchy, but I think you get what I'm saying. It's just like
Yes,
there's a
absolutely.
lot that you can get angry about that's probably not worth getting angry about. And I think I'm doing a much better job as I get older of recognizing what those things are and maintaining more of an even keeled approach to life.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And I think, as I was listening to you, I was thinking back to, just general broad strokes of the environment at the time. Yes, we worked at HBS and yes, we had, lots of resources, but for a lot of that time, it was just three people on a team. And in the 2008, 2009 budget constraint, we lost a teammate. Most departments didn't lose anyone. Um, and I remember other situations where, oh, this team needs to grow. Let's go to research and pluck one of their people. Um, and it worked out great for Paul Masari. He was
Hmm?
expert at marketing and communications, expert at research as well. Um, so yeah, I think that how could it not impact, sort of what went on for you as a manager as well? Like, well,
Hmm.
this keeps happening. We keep losing
Right.
resources. We're dealing with I think it was actually Val Roberts who said sharp elbows. Like there were some sharp elbowed people.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
I feel like that aligns with my now that you say it. Yes.
yeah. And I think for me, what I've taken from some of those experiences is the need for me to speak up. Like I didn't say, "Hey,
Mhm.
fundraiser, you can't talk to me like that." You or
Right.
other colleagues like that's not okay. Um,
Yes.
because I ended up like just internalizing a lot of stuff and like taking it home. And my wife's like, "Why are you snapping at our kid? Like they're 18 months old and like, well, this happened at work." Great. That's where it stays to the best of your ability.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's,
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of how I would think about it, answering that
Yeah,
question too is like, well, I feel like I'm much more open to be like, I'm calling BS on that. That's
right. And that's huge, to be able to say, I'm willing to identify this boundary
yeah,
and there is no crossing this boundary, or we're going to have to negotiate if you get any additional boundary space. It's a really valuable thing to be able to develop uh, just in life.
yeah.
And that's a hard one for me. I'm like a Labrador retriever. I'm just like, what? How can I help you? And sometimes that's not the right mindset to bring to a conversation. Sometimes you have to be willing to say, well, actually, I hear what you're saying. And if I understand correctly, it's this, this, and this. But unfortunately, that's just not how we're going to be able to proceed, And you can say things, and this is something that I've worked really hard on, and I think you do this very well too, Tim, is like you can enforce those boundaries and be kind and be respectful and
Yeah,
diplomatic all at the same time. Like enforcing a boundary with a colleague or reframing how to think about something is not, it doesn't have to be a negative experience for anybody.
right. Yeah. Yeah, that's well put. The chief development officer at my last place, Intermountain Healthcare, David Flood, um, he had this very succinct saying for situations like this. He's like, clear is kind. I'm not trying to disrespect you, not trying to be
Yes.
negative, but you know, this is how I see it. Come talk to me if you see it differently.
Yes.
Yeah,
And that's the key, right? So he's saying it's not the end of the discussion. I'm happy to
yeah,
talk about it more with you, right? But it's also like it's my prerogative in my role at this organization to be able to create this limit or set this boundary
yeah,
or say yes or no to this thing.
yeah,
And we can talk about it if you're having trouble understanding my perspective on it, or if you want to be able to share your disagreement. But sometimes it's just going to be the answer is no.
yeah,
And that, like I reserve the right to say no.
yeah.
I feel like that one of my parents might have said that to me once upon a time. Like, look, I'm your parent and I reserve the right to say no. And sometimes you're going to be unhappy about that, but you know what? Such is life, and I'm doing this for everybody's benefit.
Exactly.
Definitely a lot of life isn't fair, Sarah.
Yes. Oh man. Well, hey, this has been just a delightful and fun and invigorating conversation to have you on today, Sarah, and talk about how you've evolved as a manager, as a colleague, as a person, to hear about the different stages of your career, um, and how you entered the field. All of this has been really enriching. So I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, I'm happy to give it. Thank you again for inviting me. It's a privilege to be part of this project.
Well, thank you so much. So we'll be airing Sarah Hall's conversation across various platforms in early March of 2025. You can find it on YouTube and the link from LinkedIn to YouTube for the audio and video. And then for the audio only, will be on Spotify and Podbean. And thank you to Luis Diaz of the Donor Participation Project, who was a past guest. He is now sponsoring my new website, peopleinfundraising.wordifysites.com. So Sarah's interview will be on that website as well. And thank you all for your support of this effort. And Sarah, it's been great to reconnect and hope that we can reconnect sometime in person again.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
You too.